around 1990, maybe 1991, somewhere's around there. And I'm swimming in jazz fusion. The electric jazz fusion thing just around that time really started to blow up. So, Chick Corea, John Scofield, Yellow Jackets, Mike Stern, Steps Ahead, Weather Report, all of that stuff. I'm digging into this and I'm really getting into this music and I'm learning a ton of stuff from listening and trying to lift those tunes. And, I'm getting introduced to all these drummers I never heard of before: Dennis Chambers, Dave Weckl, Peter Erskine, Steve Smith, all these guys. And then a life-altering thing happened one day. My older brother, Rich, a professional and now world-renowned bassist. Shout out to Rich Brown. He came home one day with a Steve Coleman record, Black Science. Black Science destroyed my entire universe. Steve Coleman is a jazz saxophonist / musician composer from, I believe, the DC area. And he's one of the most mind-crushingly brilliant musicians I've ever heard, ever. It's the first time I heard Steve Coleman was on this Black Science record. And it was a song called Turbulence. And I could not believe my ears when I was hearing this stuff because of a whole lot of reasons. For whatever reason, it was the most, probably at that point, the most technically advanced, crazy stuff I've ever heard. But at the same time, I was connecting with it. It's not the same thing as listening to, say, Planet X or something for the first time. It's just all technical stuff, and the entire time it's just flying over your head. But for whatever reason, man, this music I was hearing on this Steve Coleman record, I didn't understand any of it, but I was connecting with it. The best way, I think, to describe Steve Coleman's music, you have to sort of imagine John Coltrane writing music in algebra class while listening to funk. So I just kind of pushed all the stuff aside that I was listening to at the moment, and I really started getting into Steve Coleman. And it's the first time that I've heard Marvin Smitty Smith play. And I've never heard drumming like that, on that level, in my entire life. The way he was grooving and sort of, phrasing and jumping over all of these super complex patterns I was hearing was something that I haven't heard up until that point. And it just kind of opened my eyes to a lot of the possibilities that were available when playing in different sort of, weird on-time signatures. Steve rarely writes anything in straight 4 time. So, I was getting introduced to all of these super long, sort of multi-time signature type phrases and stuff like that. And I just got fascinated with it, and I had to dig in and start to learn it. So, eventually I just started trying to pick apart and, learn all of these songs that I was hearing, try to pick apart the sections. And, it really done a lot for my ear listening to that stuff, because you had to figure out, you couldn't just figure out the lick. You had to figure out the structure of what was going on. And that whole thing did wonders for my odd time playing. So I eventually became obsessed with Steve Coleman and 5 Elements, and that's all I was listening to for a long time, just sort of getting really familiar with that kind of stuff. And then over the course of several albums, I was introduced to a couple of different drummers. So Marvin Smith was the first one. A guy named Gene Lake Jr. came in after Marvin left the band, and found out he was every bit as crazy as Marvin was. So I just started thinking, like, where are all these dudes coming from, man? There's a small group of people, small group of brothers in DC that was making this incredible music wasn't really as popular or nearly as popular as the stuff coming out of, the whole GRP camp. But, the level of musicianship was mind-blowing. So listening to Steve Coleman's music played probably the most significant part in me developing my odd time playing capabilities. I was kind of introduced to it before when I was listening to all the other fusion stuff that I first got into. But getting into Steve's music introduced an entirely different level of odd time playing. When I got into that, that's what really helped me to shape that ability. So I have to sort of sidetrack a little bit to get to this third drummer that I want to tell you about. But during the time I was listening to all of this music, you started getting familiar with the musicians that were in that camp. So there's a piano player named Andy Milne that used to play with Steve. Andy eventually broke off and started doing some solo records. And that introduced me to a guy named Shawn Rickman. After Gene Lake left the band, Shawn Rickman jumped in, and he's been playing with Steve for quite a few years now. If you've never heard of Shawn Rickman, AKA The Rick, let me tell you something, man. You need to do yourself a favor and give yourself that gift. Shawn Rickman has been one of my favorite drummers for several years. And he's not a name that a lot of people heard of. And when you watch him, you'll wonder why. You'll be mad at the injustice in the world. Shawn has some of the most amazing technical facility on the drums that I've ever seen. And I'm talking out of anyone I've seen do it. If you want to watch and get into a drummer that's going to push you to push yourself on this thing as far as the possibilities for anything, grooves, phrases, independence, soloing, all of that stuff. You got to get into Shawn Rickman. So, this episode of Heroes is to introduce all of you watching to the drummers of Steve Coleman and Steve Coleman's music. So, Marvin Smitty Smith, Gene Lake Jr., and Shawn the Rick Rickman. Remember those names, write them down. As far as recommended listening, if you want to introduce yourself slowly to Steve Coleman's music, I'm going to give you 5 albums. Actually, I'm going to give you 4 and then a bonus one, all right? So the first one is called Rhythm People. Rhythm People, there's a lot of songs on that record that I used to play over and over and over again that I learned a lot from. The next one is called Black Science. Black Science is the record that changed my entire life as far as the technical, a lot of the technical stuff that I know how to do now, particularly my odd time playing ability. I realize I haven't done any odd time playing lessons yet. Don't worry, I'll get to those this year for sure. Drop Kick is the next one. I used to wear that album out. Dropkick is a great record. So those first 3 albums, Marvin Smith is playing on those first 3. The next one is called Def Trans Beat. Yeah, that's definitely one that you gotta check out. Gene is doing some ridiculous playing on that album. And this 5th one I'm gonna tell you about is actually not a Steve Coleman record. It's an Andy Milne record called Y'all Just Don't Know. Sean Rickman's work on this album is some of my favorite playing that I've heard him do. He's on the whole album. And you have to check that one out. Now, the cool thing about all of this is that I've actually become friends with Sean. And the way that happened is that my brother Rich, that I told you about earlier, through different fortunate circumstances, he actually ended up playing in Andy's band. And I believe that led him to playing with Steve Coleman, because he was in that camp already. So through that connection, I got to meet Sean personally, and then we became friends. We've been friends for a few years now. Now, Sean also has a YouTube channel that I want to tell you guys about. I think it's been actually up for a couple of years, but he's at the point now where he's going to really start to give it some attention, focus on some regular content, drum lessons, performances, stuff like that. But he's really wanting to concentrate on the lesson side of things. So after you watch this, make sure you jump over there. I'll put a link in the description. Give Sean a subscribe. Check out what he's doing over there. I actually have a couple ideas. I haven't talked to him yet, but got a couple ideas about some collaboration lessons with him that I think would be really cool, particularly on the odd time stuff, because he's a master at that type of thing. Check him out also here on YouTube. Just type in Sean Rickman in the search bar. There's a bunch of videos of him doing his thing. Lots of Steve Coleman footage he has up there, and lots of other stuff that I think you'll really like. You know I wouldn't steer you wrong, man. Seriously, you trust me by now. So when I tell you have to get into these 3 drummers, trust me on that. To check out Steve Coleman's music, hit the link in the description. Go over to the MBass website. One cool thing about Steve is that he's all about sharing his music with the world. So you are actually able to download all of his music for free off of the MBass website. There's a download page with all of his albums on it, and you're free to grab whatever you want. So remember those albums that I told you about? Go check them out, sample some of the tunes, check out some of the grooves and stuff that's happening on these things. I guarantee you it's going to blow your mind. Thanks for watching this video. Share it with a friend. Like, subscribe. See you next video.